Hello dear friends and welcome to Insight Reading Enlightenment, a podcast where the notes on the page are only the beginning. I'm your host Darina Blogina, traverso player and eternal enthusiast of all things early, curious and slightly off the beaten track. This isn't just a podcast about sight reading, though we do love a well-placed ornament. It's a space for musicians, scholars, and curious souls to explore early music as a living, breathing art form. Together with inspiring guests, we dive into stories behind the scores, question traditions, and celebrate the wonderfully diverse voices shaping our field today. Whatever you are, a Baroque buff, a Renaissance dreamer, or just here for the lewd jokes, you are warmly welcome.
So I'm Laura Granero, I'm a Spanish forte pianist, and I'm also a musicologist. I'm studying a PhD in Vienna at the University of Music and Performing Arts, and I'm specializing in female pianists as the topic of my dissertation, and I'm also co-organizer of the Atelier Mignon, where we are today.
Yes, and I'm Sebastian, and I am a pianist, harpsichordist, organist. I work as the assistant cathedral organist in St. Gallen in eastern Switzerland, and I am also a researcher, musicologist. Since 14 years or so, I have been involved in several projects at the Hochschule der Künste in Bern on 19th century performing practice, and my specialty is recordings, early recordings, especially those for self-playing instruments like reproducing pianos or also organs. And this is also something that we care very much for here in the atelier, where we have a collection of these rolls and also an instrument, though not a pneumatic historic one, but a modern disklavier reproducing piano on which we can play these rolls and study them and have them as an inspiration for our own performing practice, but also to give a dialogue really with history whenever we perform here.
Also, we have our other guest, Chufa, which is also, I guess, a co-founder of your atelier. And she's also on the logo of your atelier, right? Could you tell about this? Because it's a very interesting artistic decision, I think. And I
Absolutely. Well, I mean, like corgis became very popular on social media, and as we were living with one, with a big diva, we realized very quickly that she was kind of a main part of the concerts. And also we decided to make a bit of a word game with mignon, that in French means cute, because as Sebastian was mentioning, this system of this reproducing piano on the piano rolls was called Velte Mignon. So we thought, okay, then it works because she's very cute, and then it also refers to the piano rolls, basically.
I see. Okay. And could you maybe tell about the background of your atelier, how it started, what you stand for, what you do here?
Yes. So the name of the atelier, official name, is Clavier Atelier Mignon 1904. The Mignon part I already explained. 1904 is because it was when it was invented or presented, this type of instruments. And many times, like in that moment where there was this big invention of history, when people speak about piano rolls, that we will explain a bit later what they are more specifically. But they all talk a lot about 1905 because that's when most famous pianists recorded. But it was very interesting because they had like a female house pianist, Eugénie Adam Benard, and she actually recorded a lot of piano rolls, I think more than 200, if I'm not mistaken. And she was the first one to record on this system. And it was for us important, like, to give also this kind of feminist message in a way. And it started just with a very practical matter that in Switzerland it's quite difficult to practice at home. And of course, if you are with a partner who is also playing historical instruments and you come together and then you have your collection, you have to do something. They don't fit into a normal flat and it would be a problem with the neighbors. So we decided to rent a studio in which we could also do some concerts, use it for rehearsals, and also put it for other people to be used. And I think that was part of the story. And maybe another, more on a personal level, it also for me had a bit of the, I think in the last podcast we were actually talking about this rejection from jobs and all of these things. So I think it's a very female concept, actually, these Salonnières, so these organizers, female organizers of concerts and of this semi-private place in which you make music in opposition to the completely public big theaters, for example. So for me it was important that in that moment in which I was trying to find a fixed employment and I did not get that I felt in a way that this was kind of something that connected me through history with this idea of these women who were opening these parallel spaces in a way. And this came even to the beginning of the 20th century, so far as to even Eugénie Dambenard, who also organized piano roll concerts with her husband and actually using piano rolls. I don't know if you want to add also.
Yeah, I think, and another thing that is important to me, why I love having this place and enjoying working here, is also that I think the way we perform music and what we do with combining research and performance is something that still one could say unfortunately or so, but I don't regret it at all. It is something that still needs some explanation and some communication. And this space can provide the opportunity to do that. We can bring in here all kinds of people, from colleagues, fellow students, teachers from the music academy here, who may come with classes of students to explore this world of early recordings. But also we can bring in people who may not even go to classical concerts regularly, but who are still fascinated by how we present this here, and by that understand a bit better what it means to perform music that is now, even if it is romantic music and only 250 years old, is already ancient in a way and very distant from us, and needs what I think we are really convinced of is that it needs a change in attitude and an approach towards this music, just as much as this was necessary, let's say 60, 70 years ago towards Baroque music and even earlier music. And that's something that I enjoy doing here. We have the instruments for it. We have the time for it in what we offer here, that it's whenever we have small public performances, it's not just a concert and then you go, but there is before and after time to stay together, to talk about what we did, and there is a great interest in that. People are really not just leaving, but they want to know more about the things we have here and how these things are done.
I'm very intrigued actually by this aspect of piano rolls, and maybe you could tell us how it was produced back then. What was the technology? Because apparently it was a new technology, the first kind of example of recording, of the process of recording music. Maybe you could highlight how it was done and who invented that.
Well, it's a long story, and I would refer you to the Museum of Musical Automatons in Seven, where just at the moment you can visit an exhibit on reproducing pianos, and I have helped create this exhibition, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out. That for probably the first time in a museum, you have the 5 major brands of reproducing pianos all in working order and playing, and you can hear them. So there you can really learn the details. To keep it short, it was not really the first recording technology. Acoustic recording preceded by about 20-25 years, but of course we know how acoustic discs, even from the time 1904 and so, sound, and what limitations they have, and especially for piano. I mean, recording a piano was much more difficult with acoustic technology than recording, let's say, a singer or a trumpet or so. And so indeed, when this company from Freiburg im Breisgau, not far from here, introduced this reproducing piano Mignon in 1904. This was a revolution in the quality in which piano recordings could then be experienced and heard. So how it is done is only partially known. Because we lost almost all of the documentation and also the recording devices. There is one fragment of a recording machine in Seven in the museum, which was used for an organ, which probably worked in a very similar way for the piano. And you can see there how they managed to record the notes, the length of the notes, the rhythms, and we know that this was rather precise, actually for the time astonishingly precise, really down to the milliseconds, and we have a very good precision in terms of agogics, rubato, tempo fluctuations, and so on. The really magical thing, of course, was that the piano could also reproduce much of the pianist's touch and the dynamic nuances. There we know, at least for the Welte and most of these reproducing instruments of other brands, relatively little to nothing how they did it. Some did not do it automatically, but it was the work of editors afterwards. Others, we assume, especially Welte, that they did do it with a machine, but how that worked is unfortunately not possible to definitely reconstruct today. But we see the results, and we see that they are, in the best cases, extremely convincing, and they are really already from 1904. We don't really know which roles were recorded then, but there must have been a couple. But then from 1905, definitely on, already there are recordings where you can hardly distinguish what you hear from the roll from how a real pianist would sound, and you can really, even professional pianists cannot tell the difference. But it's not that every roll is that good. It depends very much. They are all, even if the result, how they sound, is not entirely perfect or convincing, they are all interesting as evidence for performing practice. That is true, even if some of them might not sound perfect. But the ones that sound the best are really something that one can still enjoy full-heartedly in a concert today. And it's amazing to include this here or in other places where these instruments are available.
And Laura, maybe you could tell us about tradition of Salonnières, of female concert organizers, and also maybe you could highlight what do you have in your collection of the piano rolls that you own?
Yes, we actually own and don't own that many in a way, in the sense that actually the most valuable, I would say, that we have is the kind of a database with digitized rolls from the common work of different universities around the world. And I think in this sense, I think what it is really magical is that thanks that we use a digital instrument, this clavier actually. So it works with MIDI, but it reproduces on a real acoustic piano. That we have a huge database without needing to have the physical roll, because these researchers are working on that. Sebastian could give a bit of an overview on what kind of female pianists are on piano roll, because there are surprisingly many, and as I said, for example, with Velte Mignon, thanks to this Eugénie Adam Benard, the amount is is really high already from the percentages.
Yeah, maybe we can speak about this later in detail when we look at the programs of the upcoming festival. It might just be interesting to say also a few words on the instruments here, even if they are not all roll instruments and self-playing instruments. But what we have really goes from copies of late 17th century harpsichords to this very modern Disklavier instrument, and the things that are especially dear to us are, of course, the early pianos. We have a copy of a Walter instrument here, but also from the 19th century. Not all of these instruments are restored yet, unfortunately. So we will grow in collection, because there are two that still need a lot of work to play. But what is an instrument that is really used a lot here and very dear to us is a Bösendorfer, very small baby grand Bösendorfer from the early 20th century. And if you look at it, you might mistake it for a modern piano at first glance. But Bösendorfer was one of these very, very few Viennese companies that really kept the Viennese action up to the First War. And this is such an instrument. It's built with a Viennese action, very similar to what Brahms had with his late Streicher grand piano in his apartment. Same kind of large late Viennese action, but the construction of the frame was at that time a very modern one, because these small baby grands had just been introduced. So this is a very interesting combination, and for early 20th century music and late 19th century, really an instrument that gives a distinctly different color and flavor than having even a Steinway of that time, but of course a very huge difference to any kind of modern piano.
And maybe coming back to the Salonnières tradition.
I think of course, there were these very strong sociological restrictions to women to be in public spaces, but it was also the fact that music was happening so much in a private way everywhere. That there were so many private concerts. So many pieces were performed for the first time in a small salon. And of course, there was also this idea of the kind of the wife also as the host of the house. And also something that I realized that even in Spain, people think like this. I don't know if it's like this in other countries, but sometimes, speaking about even with my mother or with a friend also, and about how her mother perceives the living room, in a way, they think of the living room not a place to be, but a place for visits. And actually, I think this comes from this, that the salon, the living room, is a semi-public space hosted by a woman, in which they can make music a bit maybe in the margins, because a lot of what happened there we don't know. Of course, also in this intimate space, there were also very interesting things, like, for example, the fact that they would make their compilations of music, and then we would know what kind of repertoire would have been played, let's say, in London in 1790s, thanks to having these kind of compilations of music made by women who were maybe just playing for themselves and for the guests. But this was really a kind of a major topic, and I think with all of these historical women, they were really these moments of concerts at the place.
But it's a very early stage of, let's say, curating music in a way, shaping a concert program.
Yeah, that's the part that it's also really, really fascinating. For example, looking at this idea of of how this Eugénie Adam Benard put these piano roll concerts, and thinking also about how we think about them. In a way, it's a way of programming, but not, because they would not get the position of being the director of theater or of the opera. So they would do these kind of things for these more semi-public spaces. And also, in a way, they might have, in so many occasions, probably there was not even a program, in the sense that it was just randomness, which could also be a concert concept.
Was it united by an idea? Let's say we're having an evening dedicated to Mayflowers, something like that. I don't know. Would there be a theme?
Well, I think it would depend very much in the occasion. In some cases, it was really like someone brought some music and it was like, oh, this composer wrote this, or I would like to introduce you to this music. And maybe some others wanted to do more of a concept. I think this idea of programming, in the sense also of musicological discourse, it's also a bit of maybe a more modern concept, Like nowadays, there are so many concerts that we have to be different, and then which I actually like. And for example, Clara Schumann also, she thought of her own programs in the ways that she created suites with different movements of music. And it was a bit like making a bouquet with different pieces that go together and a small prelude that she composed or improvised. And it is very innovative in a way. And it is also very interesting because nowadays I think we see really a lot of polarization of programming, in the sense that we see some programmers that are completely irritated if something is not just canonic and normative way of programming with the Sinfonia Concerto and whatever. But on the other hand, then we see that a lot of programmers are also trying to develop very exquisite concepts on music. So I think it's quite interesting. I think also we went a bit experimental and crazy sometimes with our concerts here. We decided not to print programs and just to announce what would happen, which I think it also gives a lot of, I think it's really nice, this idea that you don't know what is going to happen. You just have some kind of general idea. And also that you can see how the public reacts. Like if you feel like the energy is going down or they're too tired, you can just call it a day and skip a couple of pieces. And this is kind of a freedom that, of course, with contracts and all of these things, I remember situations actually very funny that, like a concert organizer interrupted us in the middle of the concert because we had changed the program. But really, she was like in the first row and we decided to change the order, and she was completely irritated by this. And we had announced it, but they did not understand. And then she was like, oh, these musicians are so romantic. What are you going to play? And everyone was laughing to tears. We really lost this concept of freshness and of surprise, I think.
Then maybe the intimacy of atmosphere in a concert, as it's in a way a safe space, a safe to be inspired, to allow yourself to be inspired, to relax among other people by just listening to a piece of music. I think it's a very interesting process in a way. Sebastian wants to say something.
Also, to try things out where you are not that sure how they will be received by the audience, and at that time, of course, it was often new compositions that you knew. When I go to the Salon of whomever, we will most likely hear a new piece that was just finished, or maybe that was even still in sketches, or that was only an arrangement, let's say a forehand version of what would later become a symphony or something like that. So of course we don't really usually have freshly composed music here, sometimes maybe improvisations or so, but we have a lot of music here where we can be 100% certain that no one in the audience ever heard it before. And so in a way we keep this spirit of presenting new things to people, because it is simply forgotten music that needs to be rediscovered. The same with the recordings. And Yeah, so that is one aspect that we can certainly keep from this salon. And the other thing is what I think was also an important aspect of these 19th century salons, that you would host guests and introduce visiting musicians would be invited then to also not just give the public concert performance, but maybe on the day after or so come to one of these salons and introduce themselves to the local community of musicians, and that's also something that we try here, that we bring in people who share the same goals, the same interests, and they come and they don't have to then give an entire solo recital, but just within this setting, they come, they exchange their knowledge, they perform a bit, but they can also experience what we do and the recordings, and this is a very, very nice atmosphere.
I mean, thinking a bit of like genres like pop or rock, it's first of all, it's completely normal that an artist or a band has a concert and then they do some featuring of one musician that maybe just sings really one song, and this is something that just doesn't happen so much in classical concerts nowadays. And also I think of course, if you go to a concert of a pop singer, most of the music you will know actually very well because you have listened a lot to the disc, to the CD before, and people can sing along the lyrics as good as the singer. But there are also moments always with surprises, with music that they don't expect, and they also don't know the order, and I think that's also quite nice because there is this now comes my favorite song and I'm so excited about this because finally, or I'm not sure if all the songs of the CD are going to be included, but then my favorite one that I was praying for weeks that would be included, then it is there. So I think that's, there are all of these ideas that we don't explore so much in classical music.
What you have mentioned before, that they were playing, mostly they were always playing contemporary music, which is, I think they would not expect to listen only to Bach or only to Mozart in the same evening. So they were really experiencing something new. But now I would like to talk about Superwomen. Yeah, because I have seen around some beautiful flyers that I know you, Laura, have designed by yourself. I really admire how they look like, and I recommend everybody to go and check out the wonderful design of your website as well. And you have told me a little bit the background of this picture and of this design that you have prepared for that.
Yes, I think for me it was actually very, but maybe I can mention this a bit later, but actually very interesting to discover that many of these composers also had other talents, or they actually liked also doing other things, and that it's also nice to just try to be artistic in general, like to find a nice design for a flyer. Like, for example, there were musicians that for example, one of the Superwomen is Fanny Davies, who was a student of Clara Schumann and also had lessons with Brahms. And she was also very good at drawing. And one can see her drawings of people going to the concerts with their ridiculous hats, and they were so funny. Or, for example, another one of the musicians, Emily Maya. Apparently, she was a pioneer because she liked to do sculptures with bread. And in the 19th century, that didn't exist, like this kind of eat art, I think it's called, So I thought it's also important to care about these details. And actually, in the design, I decided to be a bit maybe provocative, in the sense that I chose as the image a very really beautiful dress in kind of silver and lavender colors of the Reine Hortense, which is not one of the composers. Well, she will be included in one of the programs, but is not one of the main Superwomen, one of these main composers. But I think it was for me the idea. I mean, in the image, she's just in a mannequin it is just the dress, there's no head. And I thought it was a good image about how people perceive women, like when they go to a concert of Katia Bunatishvili or Yuya Wang and they only speak about the dress. It is like you are reduced to just what you wear. And in this sense, I thought like, like they don't even have a face. They could have been even queens, like in the case of the Reine Hortense. And still, you Google Hortense de Beauharnais and you get the, just the dress. And I thought it was a powerful image. We metaphorically decapitated all of these women of the past.
I think it's the first edition of this festival.
Yes, exactly. It's the first edition of the festival. For me, what was important was, I think there are already other, luckily, and I'm so happy about that, other composers other festivals about female composers in Basel. There has been now like a boom with female classics and Feminale. And what is particular about this one, and I think this is really maybe the first one, at least in Switzerland, it is, and maybe one of the few in the world, is that it is about 19th century performance practice and about historical interpretation and female composers. So in this sense, I think it's very innovative because I don't think there was something like this in Switzerland.
And you have some special cultural activities, what I have seen from the program, and some innovative, let's say, formats. Could you highlight on that?
Yes, I don't know if the formats are so special, but what I decided was that I would also like to have superwomen that are alive. So I decided that most concerts would also have something different, and we would also involve some brand of Basel run by women. So it's for this reason that we collaborated with different female entrepreneurial women, like in your case with your podcasts. But also, for example, with Cava Hispania, that is also run with two women who are doing a great job looking for Spanish wine and selling it, and also with La Nueva, which is two women that they run, it's not a restaurant, but like these places in the
catering.
Catering, yes, like they're in the Madhalle with Spanish food, and also with Milos Cookies, which is one of the favorite Basel cookies, I think.
I love their place. It's a great atmosphere there. But I think it's a very interesting combination. What I was wondering about is that, so your festival is dedicated mostly to the female composers of the second half of the 19th century, let's say, beginning of the 20th century.
Actually
correct?
Not. We start with Isabella Colbran, who was born in 1785 and died in 1845. Then we, I'm not saying it in the order, but then we have Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel, with this movie The Other Mendelssohn by director Sheila Hyman, who is actually a descendant of her, and then we have Louise Farrenc, who is also kind of mid 19th century, and then Emily Meyer, who lived quite long actually in the 19th century, and then the latest one is Fanny Davies, which is actually the first concert, and there I was a bit provocative because I wanted to include one that is not a composer. I mean, she was a composer because in that moment there was not this distinction, and she certainly composed and improvised. And for example, we know that she could transpose the orchestral part of the Beethoven concerto to any key, just sight reading prima vista. But we don't have pieces by her, let's say.
I was also wondering, how did you select those composers for the festival? Is there any red thread that is uniting?
Actually not. I wanted to have composers that would have had kind of very different lives, in the sense that Isabella Colbrand was really like a super diva, in the sense that she was one of the biggest opera divas, so she really was a superwoman in her time. But I also wanted to have someone more like Emily Meyer, who was someone rather that was also well known and so on, but also struggled a lot during her life. I mean, Isabella Colbrand also struggled because she was married to Rossini. So and so it was not necessarily just a matter of kind of a red thread, but I wanted also to combine, like composers that we would assimilate more with this kind of idea of super strong public sphere, more superwoman kind of feeling, with other ones that were kind of in between. Like I would say Fanny Davis, she was both, in the sense that she was maybe one of the most famous English pianists at the time, but at the same time she struggled so much and ended up being poor and sick.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pity that with the piano rolls and any kind of early recordings, if you look through the catalogs, you find very, very little music composed by women. The one exception is Cécile Chaminade, because she recorded her own music and quite
she
a bit.
She composed as good as men. Somebody, I think it was Saint-Saëns. I don't remember who it was, but sorry.
But she's the one exception where we have really a good amount of recordings of her music by herself, but also by others, and luckily even by men, because that is even rarer. I mean, women playing music composed by women is already rare on early recordings, but men playing music composed by women, there's almost nothing.
But this is quite funny, because it's like nowadays what they say about music composed by women, even in pop, like it is mostly women who listen to them, but then to the men it is both genders, like it was already happening in that time.
Yeah, but so this is actually very difficult to bring a lot of recordings with music by women composers. With pieces performed by female pianists, it's much easier. It's not that we can say that it's 50-50 what we have in these recordings. The men are by far in the majority as performers also, but at least there is a good amount, and very, very interesting female pianists with fantastic recordings. The challenge is a bit, how far can we go back with some of the men? The oldest we have on these recordings, we can go back to pianists born in the 1820s and 1830s, if we think of people like Reinecke, Leschetizky, Saint-Saëns. With the women, it's unfortunately not possible to go that far back. But looking around a bit, we see, at least, for example, for the concert with the music of Louis Farrenc, who was teaching at the Paris Conservatoire a piano class for, I think, over 30 years until her death in 1875, that we can get an idea of how women played the piano in France at the Conservatoire in the second half of the century. Even if those pianists were not her direct students, but her successor, for example, was also who took over the position. She had then students who recorded, and so this is something. If we listen then, for example, to pianists like Clotilde Kleberg. Also, in a way, to Teresa Carreño, of course, because she was in Paris for a while in the 1860s and had lessons with Georges Mathias. So those were women who were familiar with the style of playing at that time in Paris, and we can listen to that. The same for Berlin. The majority of the female pianists we have on record is a much younger generation, which is equally interesting, but in Berlin also there are a few who come from a generation that can tell us how was piano playing taught at the, let's say, by Scharwenka at the Scharwenka Conservatory or at the Sternsche Konservatorium, in the circle of Joachim and Rudolf and so on. And this is what we want to explore, even if it's unfortunately not the music composed by these superwomen.
The connection with Berlin was because of Emily Meyer, that in every concert we try to connect it also kind of to the city and what happened also later with female musicians. And of course in the concert dedicated to Fanny Davis, she recorded several piano rolls, so we will listen directly to her and actually to some that are not very well known. So this role, so I think it's really quite interesting. And for me also with the case of Davis, it's also interesting because she recorded early music. And of course Basel is very much connected to the early music revival, and she was actually a very good friend of Dolmetsch and of Hipkins, and actually her place of holidays was also Switzerland. So and she had a Swiss original harpsichord on which she played with the daughter of Dolmetsch. So yeah, that's why also we invited Job ter Haar kind of to also do some early music together on the style of the beginning of the 20th century.
You're researching so much, and I was wondering, as my experiences as the heritage, let's say, produced by female creators, composers, musicians, it's much more hidden, it's not on the surface, so you need to research it in a special way. How do you lead your research? Where do you research, for instance, about these piano rolls, about the lifestyle of those musicians and composers? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean that this is just the problem that the way of programming it is not just that it is canonic in the sense of repeating the same pieces, but that they're of course always by male white composers. And I think the reality was that it was so much diverse in every sense, but of course there are so many problems already with the fact of the surnames. And with the fact also if they had children, then there were opportunities of them taking care of what their mothers did. If they didn't, and if they were like Fanny Davis, new women in the sense of lesbian women who did not have children and were economically independent, they had this problem. Then, for example, with Isabella Colbrand, we were with the situation that Rossini, when they got married, he took over all her finances and completely profited from her. She was being the great diva, and actually the great divas were the ones who were getting the real money, and he was just taking all the money and using it for himself, of course, many of these things make it very difficult to trace things, and also I think many parts are just probably lost forever. And yeah, I think it's, I don't know if you would like to add something, but
yeah, I mean, fortunately we don't have to do all the work ourselves, and there are others who are greater experts in this than we are, and for example, especially in the German language, there are these two wonderful online encyclopedias on women in music, and they're with a lot of biographical material. What I see still, this is wonderful to have an overview of the names, to know who was there. As soon as you start digging a bit deeper into what these women did, especially in terms of composing and even more performing and recording, there is still a lot to uncover. But at least we have the starting point, and then we look from there. Or also, in terms of when we speak about performance style, for example, and performance research, we think a lot in these categories of tradition and schools. And a lot is accessible today. For example, a good example is the Leipzig Conservatorium that digitized their entire database archive of students. So you can just go through that online and go through these names and see in the class of Karl Reinecke how many women did study piano with him. And so this has become much easier to at least get an entrance point where you have a name, but then you have to do something with this, and especially with recordings, I see now that we have to update a lot of these biographies and say, yeah, she composed, she was a pianist, she performed, this is all documented, but she also recorded, and now we know where to look for the catalogs. Very interesting thing, for example, by pure chance, we had a concert here in which we played music by Ingeborg Bronsart, wonderful composer, even wrote operas that were performed at that time. But she was born in Russia. She was born Ingeborg Stark in St. Petersburg, but she then moved to Weimar to study with Liszt and married Hans von Bronsart there, who was a good friend and also student of Liszt. And she then also ran a musical salon in Hanover, where the husband had a post as a Kapellmeister or something. So they were really a power couple in music in the late 19th century, and she composed wonderful music, really. But although both she and her husband lived long enough so that they could have made recordings, as far as I know, they did not. But by pure coincidence, in a collection of piano rolls in Italy, I suddenly saw the name Bronsart mentioned as a performer, and it turns out it was the daughter. That the daughter, Clara Bronsart, also became a pianist, and she then recorded, not for one of the major labels, but for a very small, obscure German piano roll company, probably in the 1910s. And I know now where to get this roll. I'm very excited to see what this is, and that's how you collect the material.
I was also wondering, for you, Sebastian, it will be a question for you. How do you feel as a man in being a feminist in a way, and how do you feel in the modern reality with all these changes that humanity experiences nowadays?
Well, that's a very broad question.
But you know what I mean? I think it's not so often when you can see a man who is standing so strong for feminist values. Not every day I see such people. And that's why I was wondering about your personal feeling.
The more I started looking into it, the more exciting it became. And that was the wonderful thing of this process, preparing not just these concerts, but already we had included women composers and performers in basically all our concerts here since we founded the place. And I have to admit, it was certainly not my specialty before we started doing that, and the inspiration clearly came from Laura's side. But I was so fascinated from the moment that I started doing my own research and started playing this music myself, that I'm now happy that I can contribute to this. I'm careful with trying to claim any right on how to interpret this, and how the history of women in music, especially in the 19th century, should be written, and how we need to look at this. But I'm very happy to contribute material and to help make this more public. The more you look at these issues in history, the more you also relate it to our times, and become, of course, sadly aware that many things have not changed as much as me included thought for a long time, that we have sometimes this attitude of saying, yeah, this was a problem of the 19th century, but we are past this, and these issues, social issues, are solved. It's far from that, and this is something that I also understood more and more the more I was looking into all of this.
I don't know if you would like to mention the wine or this particular wine that we're having here on the table, and why did you choose it? And actually, I wanted to shout out for my other podcast that is called Why White Wine. I think I have never mentioned it in my Insight Reading Enlightenment podcast. So now I'm doing that. And maybe I could do a couple of stories about this wine and post it on our Instagram channel on Why White Wine. But this is a red wine, I think.
This is a red, then we would need to exchange it, because we also got whites from...
Yes, I just had this... crazy idea, like in Basel. Basel is in every way a town in a way, and there are a lot of women having kind of opening shops, starting to do entrepreneurial projects. I mean, of course, this is also kind of a sad part of. I think it's a positive part and a negative part in many ways, in the sense that sometimes, I think it also comes from the fact that you don't get the kind of position that you want in a big company or whatever, because it's much more difficult to do this as a woman. So then you have to do it for yourself. Like, for example, Louise Farrenc, I don't know if you know this, but together with her husband, they run a publishing house. And that's how she could publish her music. Isn't it amazing? And I thought, okay, what brands to ask in Basel? And because I come from Spain, then I thought, okay, Cava España has to be with that. And it was also because I follow an influencer who is from Spain, Honolala, Sarah, and she went there and got some wines. And then I talked with Cava España, because I suppose that one of them might have been Spanish, and she's half Spanish, from Seville, Sira. So I immediately, for me, this is very strange to go and look, for musicians to ask for sponsoring and things like this. So I went with a red face, I wrote first on Instagram, I want to collaborate with you. And then I was like, we have this festival called Superwomen. Would you like to give us some wine? And they decided to help us with with it. And we have decided that for every concert there will be one wine of the shop that we will present. And also, of course, that's why also I thought about you, that you could try with your podcast also one of the bottles that we can get there. And maybe Sebastian, you can say what you got so that we drink now.
Yes, what do you prefer? What is your wine taste?
Oh, I like a lot of things, but in this case, I was at a degustation of Cava España just about 2 weeks ago or so here in Basel, and what was amazing for me to discover, those were certainly not the first Spanish wines that I drank, but that even from regions where you have a very clear idea of, let's say, what a Rioja is, they had things that were incredibly surprising from the famous regions, but also from those that are, at least here in Switzerland, in Germany or so, not that well known, where we tend to focus a bit on the heavy reds from Rioja and Ribera del Duero and so on. In this case, what we have here is a Priorat, so from Catalonia, remarkably rich wine full of berries and dark fruits, and I like that very much.
Maybe the last question. What would you advise or recommend to people who would like to research more about female musicians, about female composers, where to start? How to proceed with your interest and research, how to deal with today's reality if you are a musician and if you would like to include more female composers, but maybe festivals, they are not so much interested or they want only Bach, let's say. Although I know there are lots of people, for instance, like you, that are trying to include and to diversify our field in this regard. maybe for some aspiring generations?
Well, I mean, I think I must say this female project is actually, in this festival, is also part of a bigger project called Ellas Componían, which means she composed in Spanish. And I've been now touring. I think I had like 8 concerts and masterclasses in Spain, from Ceuta to Asturias in the north. And it was really quite incredible to see like children with 7 years old starting to play works by female composers. The good part about Spain that I was always very critical, because they have an extremely high kind of bureaucratical system. Like they have these programs that the teachers have to write, where you say, okay, I'm going to play one Baroque piece, one classical, blah, 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 blah. And they have to be very strict to follow this. Is that, of course, now, I mean, Spain has also very good equality laws and policies, and almost every conservatory now is starting to have like a committee for equality, even like at a Musikschule level. And then they try to organize activities and also include this as part of the program. Like, for example, the piece that they have to learn in some year is by a female composer, and these kind of things. And always in March there are some events. Unfortunately, March, but should be all through the year. So I always think that it should just not come from our own motivation, but it should also come from the institutions. That this is just in the same way that you play an etude by Chopin, you have to play every year a piece by a female composer. And this is already a small percentage if you think. But I think it's at least something like this that will change things. And then I think also with matters of motivation, I mean, I think what Sebastian was precisely describing, I mean, if you realize like, it's like finding a treasure, in the sense that you know, like you find this hint, and then you find another hint, and then you find another composer and another one, and it is like it doesn't stop, in a way that it's a very humbling experience. Like you're constantly learning about new composers, new stories. And I think this is a motivation. If you think, you know, like maybe you are the first one to record something, you know, like for example with Emily Meyer is extremely strange. Like the Brahms cello sonatas there are more than 200 recordings of them. Emily Meyer, there's not a complete one. So I think that's a big motivation. And what we did was kind of to establish a minimum in general, that every time we play a concert, there's at least one piece by a female composer. Like these, if the programmers want to tell you, okay, play Bach, Beethoven and Brahms, then you can have 1 minute piece maybe by a female composer at least.
One has to play these things. One has to discover them by playing, and but they are hard to play. The stuff is as difficult as what men wrote, because they were just as good as pianists as the men were, and or on any instrument, that is probably true. So I think what we need is, and that's a bit what we try to do here, and as we are in a sight reading podcast, maybe it's good to mention that one needs to play a lot of this music, and one needs this fluentness in learning music quickly, without performing it in a dilettantish way, so that it can be heard. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. But the other thing is also true. To really do them justice, one has to practice them as seriously as one would practice a Chopin or a Schumann piece, and especially the chamber music needs to be well rehearsed, and it means one needs to take time to do this, because otherwise rediscovering it will not last, because the impact that this music makes depends also largely on the quality in which it is performed. And of course, it is no help to have more and more and more quickly produced recordings or performances of music which then no one is fascinated by, simply because it's performed badly. So we need both. Discover the thing, play it as much as possible, sight read, go through it. But then, if you record it, if you perform it in concert, study it as seriously as you are used to study your Beethoven sonatas.
Yes, I was going to say to add to this that. Actually, the problem is that as performers, we're also trained in this male canon. So we are used to play thousands of Chopin pieces. Well, not thousand, but of Beethoven.
1,000 times
No.
sure.
Yes, of Beethoven, Chopin, Brahms. So, for example, for a pianist, you get used to certain ways of writing. And I think what I realized was that with some of these composers, because they wrote in different ways, especially the ones that were super amazing pianists, like, for example, Clara Schumann or Fanny Mendelssohn, they also have different physicalities. And I realized I got used to the physicality at the piano of Chopin or of Brahms, but I did not have these reflexes and these things because I haven't been playing this repertoire since I was a little girl, if you know what I mean. Like the textures are different, and I think you learn this with every composer.
And surprisingly, you realize this even with music that is not that difficult. There are things that look at first glance like a Lied ohne Worte by Mendelssohn, and you think, this is it's not something that I'm going to practice, need to practice hours and hours to make it work. But then it feels very different, although it sounds similar, it looks similar, but it feels very different, and you struggle really to get the technique right. It's very astonishing.
Thank you very much, guys, for this wonderful talk. And maybe last question, are you planning to proceed with this festival and have a second edition? Will it be a yearly event?
Yes, we would like to. I mean, of course, we depend on funding because I think, for now we didn't get the kind of help we would have liked. So I think for a second edition to happen, also inviting more musicians and without having us to perform in every concert. I already have ideas like of what composers I want to have the next year and things like this. So yes, there will be definitely a second edition, I hope.
Yes, I certainly hope so too. And I mean, a second edition can happen here because this room, of course, has advantages, with the disc clavier and all the historic instruments. But I think we are also open to bringing these programs or parts of them somewhere else if there is interest in it. And something that is also a bit a dream of mine is that this should also have some. I would like to continue the work on this also through a web page that we document these things better, and that we keep publishing content on female composers and female performers through a website of the atelier. But these things take a bit of time, and we're not quite there yet. But hopefully, with the summer, there comes a bit of time to put something online. I
wish you all the best, and all the best to the festival.
Thanks to you
Thank
also
you.
for your support. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Insight Reading Enlightenment. If you enjoyed today's episode, I invite you to explore the description box below. You'll find some links and extras. And if this journey through early music inspired you, please consider following the podcast, sharing it with a fellow music lover, or leaving a kind review. It's a small gesture with a big echo, and it truly helps this project grow. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep listening between the lines. Bye bye.